You look across the room and you see empty space. You wave your hand, and you feel a gentle resistance. You call it air. You think of it as a void, a transparent nothingness that occasionally moves. You imagine it as a passive backdrop to your life, a quiet theater where the solid objects exist. You think you are sitting in a room filled with nothing. You are wrong. You are not sitting in an empty room. You are wading through a chaotic, violent ocean. You are trapped at the bottom of a crushing column of invisible debris. It is not empty. It is not passive. Every single second, trillions upon trillions of microscopic projectiles are slamming into your skin, ricocheting off your corneas, and colliding with the fragile membranes of your cells. You don't feel the violence because you were born into it. You think you are safe because your eyes evolved to ignore the swarm. But invisibility is not absence, and if that invisible swarm decides to move in the same direction, just a little bit faster, the empty space you trust will tear you apart. The illusion of the void. Look at the space between your face and the screen. Your brain processes it as a continuous, transparent medium. You might imagine it as a very thin, invisible fluid, a smooth substance that parts effortlessly as you move through it. This is your first intuitive crutch. You believe in continuity because continuity is all you have ever experienced. But continuity is a hallucination. The physicist Richard Feynman once asked a profound question. If some cataclysm were to destroy all of human knowledge, and you could only pass a single sentence on to the next generation of survivors, what should that sentence be? His answer was not a complex mathematical equation. It was not the theory of relativity. His answer was the atomic hypothesis. He stated that the most information-dense sentence in physics is the simple, brutal fact that all things are made of atoms, little particles that move around in perpetual motion, attracting each other when they are a little distance apart, but repelling upon being squeezed into one another. To understand the space around you, you must first accept Feynman's premise and abandon your concept of a continuous gas. There is no such thing as air in the way you intuitively feel it. The word is just a biological shorthand for an environment too complex for your primitive senses to parse. Imagine stopping time right now. Take a cubic millimeter of the empty space right in front of your eye and dramatically magnify it. The smooth, transparent fluid your brain constructs instantly vanishes. What replaces it is mostly pure, terrifying emptiness, an absolute void. But scattered throughout this vacuum are distinct, jagged little clumps of mass, mostly paired atoms of nitrogen and oxygen. They are not touching. They are separated by relative gulfs of absolute nothingness. If you zoomed in enough to make a single oxygen molecule the size of a glass marble, the next nearest molecule wouldn't be touching it. It would be several inches away, suspended in total dark isolation. In this microscopic realm, the concept of a breathable atmosphere loses all meaning. There is only the void, and there are the objects within the void. They are solitary. They are disconnected. They possess no collective mind, no fluid nature, and no inherent smoothness. You spend your entire life breathing in, walking through, and living within a swarm of discrete, isolated entities. You think of air as a singular noun, a singular thing that surrounds you. You must begin to think of it as a plural. It is a collection of unconnected, heavy little rocks of matter, sharing the same space, entirely blind to your existence. The mathematical violence of room temperature. You sit in a quiet room with the doors closed. The curtains hang completely motionless. If you light a match, the flame points perfectly straight toward the ceiling. You describe this environment as calm. You believe the air is at rest. You assume the microscopic world mirrors the stillness of your macroscopic reality. This is your next mistake. Look at the thermometer on your wall. It reads a comfortable 20 degrees Celsius. You think of temperature as a state of being, a gentle quality of the environment. You feel it as a sensation on your skin. But physics does not care about your comfort, and it does not recognize warmth. In the grim mechanics of reality, temperature is not a feeling. Temperature is a speedometer. Let us unfreeze time in that microscopic void we established. The isolated, heavy little rocks of nitrogen and oxygen are not hovering in place. They are moving, and they are moving with a ferocity that makes a mockery of the stillness you perceive. In your perfectly quiet, calm room, these invisible projectiles are screaming through the void at roughly 500 meters per second. That is over 1,000 miles per hour. They are moving faster than a fired handgun bullet, faster than the speed of sound. But they do not travel far. In this densely packed void, a molecule moving at over 1,000 miles per hour travels only a microscopic fraction of a hair's breadth before it suffers a catastrophic collision with another molecule. They do not gently bump into one another. Their electron clouds violently repel, snapping them back and sending them ricocheting away at new, unpredictable angles, only to crash into another molecule a fraction of a billionth of a second later. Every single distinct particle of air in your room is experiencing billions of these violent, high-speed collisions every single second. This is the reality of room temperature. It is a ceaseless, hypersonic war zone. When you turn up the heat in your house, you are not filling the room with a mystical substance called warmth. You are simply injecting more kinetic violence into the swarm. You are whipping the projectiles to move faster, forcing them to strike one another harder and causing them to ricochet with greater fury. The silence of your room is an auditory illusion. The stillness of the air is a lie born of scale. The empty space around you is boiling with kinetic rage. You are entirely submerged within a microscopic shrapnel blast that never ceases, an infinite, blinding crossfire of hypersonic bullets happening right in front of your eyes. The conspiracy of equilibrium. You are now faced with an obvious paradox. If you are submerged in a microscopic war zone, if trillions of invisible projectiles are flying around your living room at over 1,000 miles per hour, why are you not bleeding? Why do you not feel the impacts? Your brain, desperately trying to maintain the illusion of safety, invents another crutch. You are taught in school that the atmosphere has weight. You imagine atmospheric pressure as a heavy column of gas resting on your head and shoulders, pressing down on you like a soft, invisible blanket. Erase that picture from your mind. There is no blanket. Gas has no inherent desire to simply press down on you. What you experience as atmospheric pressure is not a passive weight. It is the real-time mechanical force of billions upon billions of physical collisions. When a nitrogen molecule traveling at hypersonic speed ricochets off your arm, it transfers a minuscule fraction of kinetic energy to your skin. One molecule doing this is imperceptible, but you are not being struck by one molecule. Every single square centimeter of your skin is currently absorbing the impact of roughly 3 times 10 to the 23rd power molecules every single second. The reason you do not feel this relentless, blinding assault is a terrifying mathematical phenomenon: statistical equilibrium. The swarm is so inconceivably vast, and its chaos is so perfectly randomized, that the violence perfectly masks itself. For every single 1,000-mile-per-hour particle that slams into the left side of your nose, another particle of equal mass and velocity is simultaneously slamming into the right side. If 1,000,000,000,000 molecules push your hand slightly to the left, 1,000,000,000,000 different molecules instantly strike the opposite side and push it back to the right. The macroscopic sum of this infinite, violent geometry is exactly 0. The sum of P equals 0. You do not feel the individual impacts because your nerves are too massive, too slow, and too blunt to register them. Your biology can only process the net average of the collisions, and the average of perfect omnidirectional violence is 0. You interpret this mathematical cancellation as the sensation of nothingness. You are not resting under a heavy blanket of air. You are suspended in a perfectly balanced vice grip. You are being continuously crushed by 14.7 pounds of high-speed ballistic force on every square inch of your body. The only reason your chest cavity does not immediately collapse inward is that the air molecules trapped inside your lungs are firing outward with the exact same hypersonic fury battering against the inside of your ribcage to hold the walls up. You survive the storm not because it is gentle, but because it is uniform. The violence is so utterly symmetrical that it mimics peace. But this peace is fragile. It relies entirely on the mathematical perfection of the swarm remaining random. The alignment of the swarm. You step outside and feel a breeze against your face. You watch leaves tremble on a branch. You intuitively label this phenomenon wind. You picture it as a river of invisible fluid flowing through the street, a sweeping, continuous current that slides past you. Because you feel a lateral pressure, you imagine the air has finally decided to move. This is fundamentally wrong. Air does not flow. The molecules do not link arms and sweep forward together like water in a pipe. They do not suddenly abandon their erratic behavior to march in a straight line. You must remember the pre-existing violence of the swarm. The isolated rocks of nitrogen and oxygen are already screaming through the void at over 1,000 miles per hour. A gentle 10-mile-per-hour breeze does not mean the air is moving at 10 miles per hour. It means the hypersonic chaos has developed a tiny, almost imperceptible statistical bias. Imagine a sealed glass sphere filled with millions of furious insects, flying erratically at blinding speeds, constantly bouncing off the glass and each other. Now, place that sphere on a wagon and gently pull it forward. The insects inside do not stop their erratic, high-speed swarming. They do not suddenly fly in a neat formation. They simply carry on their violent collisions. But now, the center of their chaos is drifting. When you stand in a breeze, the molecules striking your face are not traveling at 10 miles per hour. They are still ricocheting at 1,000 miles per hour. But the mathematical cancellation that protected you in a quiet room has been broken. The equilibrium is gone. Instead of exactly 1,000,000,000,000 molecules striking the front of your face and exactly 1,000,000,000,000 striking the back of your head, the microscopic drift in the swarm means 1,000,000,000,000, and one molecules now strike the front. The chaos is no longer perfectly symmetrical. You do not feel a continuous flow. You are feeling the terrifying arithmetic of unbalanced momentum. You are feeling the macroscopic consequence of millions of excess, high-speed ballistic impacts happening on one side of your body. As this statistical bias increases, the illusion of the gentle fluid collapses entirely. A hurricane is not a faster river of air. A hurricane is just a slightly larger rounding error in the swarm's chaotic geometry. When the swarm's directional bias shifts by 50, 100, or 150 miles per hour, the sheer volume of excess hypersonic collisions stops being a gentle push. It becomes a concentrated kinetic bombardment. The swarm is still mostly random. Most of the molecules are still just violently bouncing off each other in every direction. But that tiny fraction of aligned momentum, that slight shift in the geometry of the shrapnel, is enough to snap ancient trees in half and rip the steel roofs off buildings. You realize now that you are never walking through a fluid. You are just surviving localized imbalances in a perpetual crossfire. The invisible wall, how nothingness kills you. Wave your hand through the air, and the air yields. You drive a car down the highway, and the air flows over the windshield. Because you have only ever moved slowly, you believe that air possesses an infinite capacity to get out of your way. You imagine it as a polite medium, forever fluid, forever willing to part around whatever moves through it. This assumption is fatal. The softness of the air is not a physical law. It is an illusion dependent entirely on your lack of speed. To understand how nothingness can kill you, you must understand how the swarm communicates. When you slowly push your hand forward, the molecules immediately in front of your skin are bumped. They ricochet forward, striking the molecules in front of them, which strike the molecules in front of them. This microscopic chain reaction acts as a warning signal, a cascading wave of collisions that tells the rest of the swarm to move aside. But this chain reaction takes time. The speed at which these molecules can bounce off one another to transmit this warning is limited by their own baseline velocity. There is a hard, physical speed limit to how fast the swarm can get out of its own way. You know this limit by a different name. You call it the speed of sound. Consider what happens if an object, a meteorite, a missile, or a human body, moves through the space in front of you faster than that limit. If you travel faster than the speed of sound, the warning signal never arrives. The molecules you strike are thrown forward, but before they can bounce away and alert the molecules ahead of them, you have already caught up. You are moving faster than the physics of the swarm can process. In this exact moment, the air ceases to be a gas. Because the molecules have nowhere to go, they stack up. Trillions upon trillions of heavy, isolated little rocks of nitrogen and oxygen are bulldozed into a microscopic layer directly in front of you. The protective voids between the atoms are violently squeezed out of existence. The isolated particles are forced together, crushing into a hyperdense, unyielding barrier. You have accidentally manufactured a solid object out of thin air. This is what physicists call a shock wave. It is not a gust of wind. It is a literal wall of hyper-compressed matter that behaves more like a solid sheet of glass than a fluid. This is how the invisible swarm kills. If you were suddenly propelled through the atmosphere at high supersonic velocities, you would not feel a rush of wind. You would violently collide with a self-generated wall of stacked molecules. The immense kinetic energy of your movement would be instantly converted into heat as the particles are crushed together. You would not be blown back. Your skeletal structure would shatter against the invisible barrier, and your biological tissues would be instantly incinerated by the thousands of degrees of thermal radiation generated by the compression. When spacecraft return to Earth, the blinding fire surrounding them is not from friction, as you are often taught. It is the brutal, luminous glow of the air literally being crushed to death against the bottom of the ship, unable to get out of the way. The air in your room is only transparent and soft because you are moving at a fraction of its operational speed. It yields to you only out of mathematical convenience. If you cross its physical limit, the void instantly hardens, and the empty space will destroy you. The biological lie you trust your senses. You believe your eyes are transparent windows to reality, and your skin is a perfectly calibrated instrument for measuring the physical world. When you look at an empty room, you think you are seeing the baseline truth of the universe. You assume evolution designed your perception to be accurate. This is your final, most deeply rooted delusion. Evolution has absolutely no interest in the truth. Evolution is a pragmatist. It only cares about survival. And to survive in a universe built on relentless kinetic chaos, your nervous system had to aggressively, fundamentally lie to you. Imagine if your biological hardware were actually capable of perceiving reality as physics dictates. If your optic nerve were wired to detect the frantic, jagged flight paths of individual nitrogen molecules, you would be entirely blind. Your vision would be instantly overwhelmed by an opaque, boiling static of matter. If your skin were sensitive enough to feel the discrete physical impacts of 30 trillion microscopic rocks slamming into your flesh every single second, you would be paralyzed by an agony of overstimulation. The sheer, deafening roar of room temperature would shatter your sanity. A creature that perceives the true atomic violence of the universe cannot function. It cannot hunt. It cannot sleep. It cannot survive. So biology built a barrier. Your brain is not an instrument for seeing the universe. It is a censorship engine designed to hide it from you. It took the terrifying, hypersonic war zone of the microscopic realm and mathematically smoothed it over. It took an infinite storm of localized kinetic energy and translated it into a polite, entirely fabricated sensation called warmth. It took a relentless, crushing bombardment of physical mass and averaged it into a gentle feeling called pressure. Your brain invented the concept of stillness. It hallucinated the concept of empty space. It painted the violent, screaming void transparent so that you could safely ignore the storm and focus on the macroscopic objects that actually mattered to your survival. You do not live in reality. You exist inside a highly curated simulation, generated by your own mind, a biological user interface designed to protect you from the terrifying machinery of the cosmos. The next time you sit alone in a quiet room, hold your hand out in front of you. Look at the seemingly empty gap between your fingers. Do not trust the peace. Do not believe the silence. Force yourself to understand the invisible, hypersonic architecture of the space you inhabit. You are submerged in a raging, ancient storm of shattered matter, protected by nothing but the mathematical perfection of its own chaos. The universe is never empty, and it is never, ever still.